Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is an all-in-one management software with apps for every business need. Odoo has apps for CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, manufacturing, and everything in between. And they're all in one easy-to-use software. And the best part about Odoo? All Odoo apps are integrated, helping you get things done faster and more efficiently. So, when you think about business, think Odoo. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, April 9th, 1939. It is Easter Sunday. Now, I know if you're listening to this in 2024 and you're going, hey, Easter was like a week and a half ago, but Easter was super early this year, 2024. Anyway, that's kind of how a calendar works. Just trust us. It is Easter Sunday, 1939, April 9th. We are in Washington, D.C., and world-renowned opera singer Marian Anderson is performing outside for an audience gathered outside the Lincoln Memorial. Anderson was not planning to give an al fresco concert that day, but she'd been denied the use of every indoor auditorium in the District of Columbia because of her race. Anderson was black, and venue after venue said she couldn't come indoors for a concert that was set to draw tens of thousands of people. So instead, Anderson performed on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, an incredible moment. This is also a chance to talk about race relations and the intersection of cultural and racial policies in that time. Also, the amazing life and legacy of Marian Anderson. We'll also listen to a little music at the end of this episode. Of course, we have to. But here, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
We'll do a biography of Marian Anderson, but let's go to that moment, that April 9th. It's a concert sponsored by Howard University.
Howard.
Yeah, there you go. I knew I had to get that in, Kellie, before you got it in. But it's kind of remarkable. I mean, Anderson is very popular at this moment, right? But it is kind of remarkable that they cannot find a venue for her to perform this big Easter Sunday concert.
Yeah. You know, when you think about Howard University's campus, there's only certain spaces that would hold X amount of people. And they sort of concluded on Constitution Hall and thought, okay, this will be the perfect place. We can fit everyone, hold everyone inside. But Constitution Hall was really owned and operated by the Daughters of the American Revolution that don't have a sort of great past with African-American relationships, to say the least. They were not at all inclined to want her there. And so after going to venue, as you mentioned earlier, they decided on, why don't we do it outside? Why don't we do it in front of the Lincoln Memorial, which I think is symbolic as well. You know, Lincoln represented someone who had emancipated the slaves. Lincoln represented American freedom. And, of course, the most contentious war in American history, the Civil War. And so singing in front of that monument was also sort of a dig at the DAR to sort of say, like, fine, we'll take it to the streets and we'll do it in front of the Lincoln Memorial.
Right. We're going to do the second founding site instead of the first.
Yeah,
it was the DAR rejection was something that did set off some reaction. So Eleanor Roosevelt, who's first lady at the time, resigns from DAR in protest. The Roosevelt administration is going to be sort of shot through this story because Washington, D.C. at this time is a deeply segregated town. But the Roosevelt administration, particularly Eleanor Roosevelt, but Franklin Roosevelt too, were found it important to include Black leaders in politics. And part of the resignation from DAR was a sort of act of solidarity keeping with those politics.
Yeah, shout out to Eleanor Roosevelt resigning from the Daughters of the American Revolution. A very powerful group. We should do just an episode on them because, I mean, I grew up, I spent time in D.C., grew up and just kind of like took it as a given. Didn't really think about what that organization was. They still kind of ran Constitution Hall, which I went to for concerts and so forth. And quite an interesting organization. But where does this idea then come to sing outdoors? It's funny, we did that episode just a couple episodes ago about William Henry Harrison speaking outdoors in early part of the year in D.C., and we were like, it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. I mean, April 9th, it's risky to go outside and do a concert like this, but where did this idea come from?
So Walter White, who is the executive secretary of the NAACP, creates this suggestion. And for those who don't know, Walter White was a heavyweight in the NAACP. He's an African-American man who phenotypically looks very white. He has pale skin, he has blue eyes and blonde hair. He did a lot of very dangerous investigative journalism for the NAACP, where he would sort of pass as a white man to get inside intel on things like, the Tulsa riot and things that were taking place all across the country. So it's his idea to say, let's take this outside and, give an opportunity for anyone and everyone to come. I think that's part of it too. But also to make this a massive display that will be talked about all across the country.
And it's interesting the way that Marian Anderson recalls this moment and her decision to go ahead with having the concert outside. Because for her, it's not what she wanted. Right. Mm-hmm. It wasn't going to be a comfortable situation. The chance of being rained out. Like, there were all of these things that it wasn't acoustically ideal. But she also understood that this was now about more than her, that it was about creating space in a city that was denying space to a Black performer. And so she says, ultimately, basically, it's not about me. So I'm going to go ahead with this plan.
Yeah.
But I think Walter White knows to make this political. Like, this is not just going to be, entertainment. That every opportunity he had where he could market or capitalize on the larger sort of racial, political, cultural questions that were happening in that moment, he used it.
Yeah, I want to take a beat on Walter White because we've talked about him a few times on the show. And then in that series that I did with Adam McKay, Death on the Lot, we did an episode about Hattie McDaniel, who was in Gone with the Wind, the first Black woman to win an Oscar. And she clashed a lot with Walter White. In part, her accusation, I think this is, Kellie, I'm curious what you think, but, I think her accusation was there was a lot of colorism on behalf of Walter White and that he really gravitated towards especially entertainers who he thought would be palatable to white audiences. And I think Hattie McDaniel felt like he favored Lena Horne over her because of just the way she looked, and so I'm curious how much
that's a fair assessment.
Yeah. And I'm curious how much of that is here, that like we have this, I think largely apolitical, very famous and renowned and sort of, I think treading carefully here, but like classically beautiful opera singer. How much is Walter White saying, this is someone who I can get behind?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you see that a lot, and that's not just in Walter Rodney. I think that's in Hollywood in general. It's the sort of your Lena Hornes, your Dorothy Dandridge, your sort of like, I was going to say stereotypical Barbie, but like your stereotypical like fair-skinned beauty that I think people feel is much more palatable, as you said. But, that changes when you think about singers like Mahalia Jackson that come later in the 1960s. I think you do start to see a switch of not just Black women and not just thin Black women, but women that are in all shapes and sizes and colors that are dominating the stage. But it takes a long time to sort of break that mold. Yeah.
I wonder if this is a chance to talk a little bit about Anderson herself. Born in Philly. There we go. All right. But incredibly talented, obviously faced segregation throughout her life, tried to apply to all white prestigious music programs, was denied. But, I'm curious because Niki, you talked a little bit about her reaction to this. And her reaction is mostly like, I'm a little hesitant to do it, but I feel the weight of this moment and I'm going to give this concert because I recognize that it's important. But is there in there a little bit of like, she's not the most naturally kind of political figure, maybe doesn't necessarily see herself. I mean, it seems that she sees herself, as she has every right to, mostly as a singer, and an entertainer and an artist.
Yeah, and that's her identity. She has been a singer her entire life since she was a small child. She had an extraordinary gift and talent that she worked very hard on over the course of her life. And it had been this kind of defining feature of who she was. And it wasn't something that she could pursue the way she wanted to in the United States. And so when she's in her 20s, she goes, like many very talented Black writers and artists to Europe, where they have more space to perform to audiences, where they have more acceptance, where
and to just be artists first and foremost. Yeah,
and they're famous, less precarious, right? And so she had come to sort of international superstardom over the course of her time in Europe. So when she comes back to the United States 4 years before this, you know how there are some figures who just seem to exist in the public imagination as kind of above and beyond politics because they're such huge stars. And this is often extremely contentious for people who have huge platforms who other people want them to use for activism. I'm thinking like Oprah and Michael Jordan and various folks. She comes back, and the thing that everyone gathers around her for is her voice. So yeah, she's not necessarily an activist first and foremost.
Hey there, Jody here, and I'm excited to tell you that one of our favorite Radiotopia siblings, Ear Hustle, is back with a brand new season. This is their 13th season, and the show just keeps getting better. Now, I don't know if you know, but Ear Hustle is the show about life inside prison, but it is not your typical prison podcast. Co-hosts Nigel Poor and Earlonne Woods have recently been spending time at 4 California prisons, and now they have a season's worth of funny, surprising, and unforgettable stories to share. In a recent episode, they were able to visit a groundbreaking prison hospice where they spoke to men who are grappling with the reality of dying inside prison. Also coming up this season are stories about the objects people keep inside their prison cells, complicated mom-daughter relationships inside prison, and stories of incarcerated people who wonder whether they've become too comfortable behind bars. These are stories about life on the inside told by those who live it. I'll be listening, and I hope you will too. Find Ear Hustle wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, I'm going to make like a shameless plug, but like this, what I talk about in my upcoming book is like leaving was often a response to white supremacy. Like, fine, you're not going to let me play. I'm out.
Yeah.
And so many people left and went to Europe or went to Canada or went to the Caribbean, and only when they felt like it was safe to come back or that it would be praiseworthy to come back do they come back. I mean, Eleanor Roosevelt has her sing in the White House, which big ups to Eleanor again. She's the ultimate like quintessential ally. Like she's always boosting people and putting them on and making sure that they have like good lighting, like but I think that when it comes to being on that national stage, international stage, it's funny how you can feel appreciated on an international stage but not in your own home country.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Marian Anderson is up against.
Yeah. So here we are back on April 9th, and they've set up this outdoor concert. 75,000 people are in attendance that day. It's happening sort of at dusk as the sun is going down. Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ickes, is the one who introduces Harold Ickes, I think people know as the person who was most responsible for implementing a lot of Roosevelt's New Deal policies. He comes on. And yeah, I mean, this is a political act, and I think he acknowledges that. He says, in this great auditorium under the sky, all of us are free. Genius, like justice, is blind. Genius draws no color lines. And it's broadcast over the radio. Who is listening on the radio at that moment? Among the masses?
Martin Luther King Jr.
Martin Luther King Jr.
10-year-old Martin Luther King Jr.
Incredible.
Just a baby.
Yeah. I mean, this is more than who could ever fit in Constitution Hall. Just
sure. Oh, yeah.
Right.
No, the DAR is sitting there going like, oh,
stadium.
man, think about the tickets we could have sold. The bar tab would have been great. Oh, man. But she sings God Bless America. She sings Ave Maria. She ends with 3 spirituals, gospel train, trampin', my soul is anchored in the Lord. And some of the remembrances of this are just stunning, people's memories of that moment.
Well, the picture for me, there's like this iconic picture of Marian Anderson with Lincoln's memorial like in the background, and the microphones are sort of all pointed up to her face, and it's just such a powerful, striking image of look at this Black woman standing before tens of thousands of people, singing and entertaining and using her voice and her talent in this way. I think it's just incredible. And she's not there. This is not a political rally. She's not giving a speech. It's
right.
None of that.
Yeah.
It's just let's come together and celebrate a talent like none other.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Kellie. The idea that this, again, not a political rally, right? It's not the March on Washington, but there is a politics to it. And Mary McLeod Bethune is in the audience. We've talked about her on the show before. She's part of Roosevelt's Black Cabinet. And she talks about just something happening. She says, something happened in all our hearts. I came away almost walking on air. We are on the right track. We must go forward. And that sense that there was something liberatory about the performance. I think that's the one quote that like stood out to me where it's just like, okay, there's a deep embedded meaning to this that extends far beyond the music itself. Although I think the music itself matters. Like it's a mix of those classical performances, but the fact that she sang spirituals as well speaks into the Black freedom struggle in really important ways.
Oh, absolutely. She's putting opera on par with Negro spirituals. We can sing these in the same spaces, and they can both be meaningful and powerful music, which this is interesting because normally I sort of poo-poo like symbolic change. Like I'm like, I don't want it. If it's not structural, I don't want it. But this, I think, is actually doing the work of both. I think symbolically it's really powerful to see. But even structurally, I think it compels people to have to break down walls, if for nothing else than capitalism, if for nothing else than to make $1, right?
Yeah.
Then, change inevitably has to come.
Yeah. And, you have to nourish people's souls in order for them to then go out and make change. And this was one of those moments for sure. I mean, the good thing is, you can listen to this whole concert on Spotify. You can watch videos of it on YouTube. We'll put links to it. But, it's just another person who was there said, quote, the sight of Abraham Lincoln with this Black woman standing in a beautiful fur coat in front of a Steinway piano singing My Country, 'Tis of Thee is a thing you don't see or hear or feel every day. I know my soul has it, and it will never, ever leave. I got to say, I keep the running list in my head of concerts that I would love to go back in time to attend. And, it's usually like Talking Heads at CBGB's or whatever. I'm putting this pretty high on the list now after doing this episode. This would be an amazing moment to have witnessed. Can
we also take a second to admire the arc that happens after this? So Marian Anderson is rejected from being able to sing in Dar. She gives this incredible historic concert. She sings at the inaugurations of Dwight Eisenhower and John Kennedy. She sings at the March on Washington. She's bestowed the Presidential Medal of Freedom. From being sidelined from American life as she was growing up, she becomes this, and maybe this is too much symbolic politics, Kellie, but she moves to the center of national politics in a really interesting way in the 50s and 60s.
Well, and she does eventually sing at Constitution Hall.
4 years after this, they finally let her in. Yeah, they make an exception to their racial ban. So, yeah.
And half the audience
they don't get rid
Black.
of it.
No, they make an exception. Yes, for sure.
They make an exception.
Sure.
But she's not the only one there. So Black people are in the audience, which I think is important, too.
Yeah.
As is Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh, yeah. She dies in 1993 at the age of 96. Another in those little moments that I like to point out on this concert of, man, think about these people who lived into eras that maybe we don't think of them as having kind of witnessed or been a part of. What was she thinking as she watched the 70s, 80s, and 90s play out, and early 90s play out? Well, anyway, let's leave it there. I don't want to do any also on this days. I want to get right to the music. So we're going to play some music as we end this episode. And then, of course, we'll also share some links. We'll do that in our newsletter. You can go to thisdaypod.com, sign up for the newsletter, and we will share a bunch of stuff for the full concert if you want to go spend some time with this beautiful moment. But That brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.